but he's a year and a half old, so that's to be expected. So I hope that there's not a lot of resistance on your part to the discussion. I think it's a topic that's worth our time. I found this quotation that I thought was interesting. Valerie Saviano, it says, founder of Mental Health USA and Restoration Ministries somewhere in Minnesota, has an adult son who has battled severe mental illness. She and her husband John found little empathy among Christians regarding the situation because people didn't know how to react. Mental illness is the most widely misunderstood illness, she says. People are afraid of what they don't understand. And I think that's a general truth. And so part of my intention with this topic is just to familiarize ourselves with some of the aspects of it. And we've already had, again, some really good conversation about how we perceive things, how it affects our mood, how it affects our thinking, how it affects our health. There's just so much that can come under this umbrella. So I'm going to do a little expository, which means I'm going to talk and you're going to listen for a minute. I created what I called the ground rules of this conversation, and is this 4? Lesson 4? I don't remember. 3 or 4. Anyway, ground rules. Sinful choices can create unbalanced lives. Does that make sense? Sinful choices can create unbalanced lives. Sometimes our feeling out of sorts, feeling out of mood, is because of choices that we have made that are contrary to God's law. Not all sin is the result of a mental unbalance, however. There are clearly choices, there are clearly free will, and those will impact our state of readiness to serve God. Are we caught up in something that is a hindrance to us? Do we have a mental unbalance because of our sin? Yes, but that's not always the case. Not all mental unbalance is a result of sin. There are instances of hereditary nature, of trauma that was of no fault of the one who was born that trauma. A host of reasons, environmental, situational, which can lead to a feeling of mental unbalance. And they're not all sinful reasons, of course. Unintended consequences can follow sin and mental unbalance too. We see examples of both in the way that people conduct themselves. And there's just, sometimes it's a lack of self-control, sometimes it's a lack of self-awareness. Sometimes we're aware of our mental state, and still unintended consequences can follow, especially with those people that may interact with us, try to help us understand ourselves. But also just sometimes there's collateral damage. People that we love and trust are sometimes the recipient of our frustration or anxiety, and that's part of living together as people. Try not to force an either-or perspective into the complex topic of human emotion and the wellness of the entire spirit, mind, and body. I don't think it's important or it's even helpful to try to say, that when we watch behaviors and we watch attitudes, that we try to categorize everything we see. I think it can be a combination and a culmination of a state of mental unwellness that can lead to very bad choices. And some of those can be very sinful as well. But there's no reason to try to create one track or the other and say, well, it's got to fit into one of these two categories, because they can easily overlap. The last one we've already touched on a little bit. God's sovereignty will frustrate our proclivity to want a clear answer as to why our emotional and mental state are imperfect reflections of divine origin. God is sovereign, and Lot was one who was frustrated because he wanted that justification. And what he received was the information that God is still in control, even though he feels out of control. Even though he feels that he's not grasping all of the answers that he wants to explain why he's suffering the way that he is, God's sovereignty will frustrate our proclivity, that is, our desire to want a clear answer as to why we're the way we are. I think we need to maintain as one of our goals here, or things to appreciate regarding mental wellness, is an open honesty about the hardships of daily living. God's mercy and salvation are not immunities to crushing moments. And you mentioned that book, Ashley, the one on the study of Lamentations, that if you have experienced these kind of things, this is a wonderful book to read. If you've not experienced these kind of things, it's still a wonderful book to read, because those moments, we're not immune from those things. And they can come with zero notice. They can befall us in terms of 100 different things. And how do we prepare for that? How do we think about, when a day like that comes? But just daily living is difficult. And there are going to be problems, there are going to be stressors that result from daily living. We've looked at this a little bit. Engage in all of the text of the Bible, not just those feel-good verses, or only those passages that we can reconcile with our reasoning or feelings. And I think this is an important one to appreciate, is we do the Passover when we don't understand a verse. Well, it may be because it's a point that may be somewhat gray to us. But I think there's shadows of meaning within texts that we can tend to kind of avoid exploring the depth of the meaning of what's going on in the context that we're reading. And so when we have something that we can't recognize with how we feel about something, or how we, maybe it's our logic or reasoning, well, let's put that one aside. It doesn't seem to flow with everything else that we think we understand. Those are probably ones that need a little more of attention. Some of Christian living is distasteful and troubling. And the Bible talks about that. There are going to be times that are momentous and will change the way that your life goes from that point forward. And know that some of those things have happened to characters we've seen in the Bible, and we can appreciate and learn from the things that befell them, and how they were, in some cases, completely rewired because of an interaction with God. I think, too, that we always want to remember, and I've heard this theme more recently than I have in years past, is that that's the world and the text, the Bible, combine to tell God's story, not our story. And so we attempt to understand the intersection of our lives while placing the significance on God's story. And Edwin Crozier talked about this in terms of prayer. And if we want our prayers to be effective, remember this is God's story. Remember this is God's world. Remember this is God's plan. This is God's salvation. And for our prayers to be effectual and effective, we have to remember that it belongs to Him. It all belongs to Him. This last one is this is the thought. I like mind pictures. You know that by now. This is the thought as I think about how we talk about these things. We walk as misguided, nearsighted infants in a dimly lit world where truth is shining through the cracks of sunlight trying to penetrate the gloom. And so it's no wonder that we don't have all the answers. I mean, it's just an acknowledgement of our abilities in sight of God's superiority in His thinking, in His foresight, in His understanding His creation. And so the fact that things don't make sense to us and we just don't have all the answers, why would we have all the answers? And I've admitted that's a big part of my problem is I want the answers. I want everything laid out so I can just read it like a book. And it's not how life works. There's just, maybe you've heard things like what's called the butterfly theory. You know, the flutter of a butterfly wings can set off one set of effects that affects something else, and then a tree falls in the forest, and then, you know, a herd of antelope stampede a village, or who knows. But this idea that subtle little impacts can change things in unforeseen ways and in dramatic ways. One spark starts a forest fire. There was a guy who was arrested for setting 3 or 4 fires within a couple hours period in Greenwood this week. He was setting apartment buildings on fire. Just not a very smart thing to do. But it just takes one little spark, takes one little flame. I want to swing back to this topic again. Again, we've mentioned a little bit, especially when we looked at Job. Why does suffering exist? And this one I'm going to let you talk more to. This is less expository, I hope. But I've got some thoughts up here on the screen and some things we can look at. But suffering exists, I'll just introduce as to draw ourselves closer to God, because we're looking for relief from that which hurts us. Suffering exists to make us dependent on someone outside of ourselves. Suffering exists to open our eyes to we don't have the level of control that we think we do sometimes. I don't know why it continues to astonish me when plans just go off the rail and it's like I have control over these things. But to draw closer to God, to seek relief from the pain, is not only a justification for suffering, but it is the way that suffering can be a blessing. Because time and again, you see warnings of those who rely too much on their own strength, their own wisdom, their own war horses, their own riches, fill in the blank. Whatever it is that make people think that they're in control of their destiny, God has said repeatedly in any of those circumstances, you're only kidding yourself. You're only kidding yourself. And that's how suffering can be a blessing, because it can turn me. It can change my thinking. It can rewire me to be more receptive to the fact that I am not all that I think that I am. Who would like to talk about the fun subject of suffering on a lovely Wednesday evening? Anyone want to help me with any personal insights or good stories? Oh, there's a good story right here, Samantha.
Well, I was going to add to your comments that I think suffering can even teach you some things about yourself. Because I think when you're put in a difficult circumstance, that can show you what's really in your heart, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, some people handle difficult circumstances impressively well. And I don't mean they don't have emotional upsets. That's not what I'm talking about. even like, what you're strong in and what you may need to work on.
I think that is an incredibly insightful thought. Maybe resiliency is a one-word summation of what you talked about, Samantha. Just this, is it practiced? Is it honed through experience? Is it something that's part of who we are from our upbringing, our families? Combination of all of those, but pulling an inner strength to show your true character. I completely agree. When things are going well, we don't know people as well as when things are going poorly for them. We find out more about a person when things are going poorly than when things are going well, generally. And to Samantha's point, a person finds out more about themselves. That requires the skill of introspection. That requires the skill of being able to step back from the pain and evaluate the circumstances and evaluate your reaction to those circumstances. And I think that's very helpful. Anyone else? Yes, sir, Chad.
Greg, I think maybe I'm not expressed this the way I should. Seems to me like it shows us that we're not in control of everything.
Mm-hmm.
That we got to go to God for relief of stress, anxiety, or anything like that. If we take it to God, we're going to do better than we will if we try to handle it by ourselves.
Yeah, it's part of life, and I said it's important that we face the fact that daily living causes stressors and anxiety and troubles, and sometimes things can be very, very difficult. And this all points to finding ways back to God. When a person is in a mentally unbalanced way, it's hard for them to see that obvious turn. It's hard for them to measure that which God offers consistently. And we've looked at examples of those who question God's involvement in their lives altogether. I've been abandoned. You've let me to die. I can't even pray. I can't praise you if you let me die, Jeremiah says. So why don't you save my life so I can glorify God? So you're right. I mean, that's the clear pathway. It's how do we see that in ourselves, and how do we help others without causing more harm than good? And that's a hard one for me to figure out too, Samantha.
I'd also add that I think suffering can allow you to be more compassionate to other people, even empathize. Because I can recall, I've always been sympathetic. I think I've always I've been a good listener, but I didn't really actually grasp what empathy was until I was in college after dealing with a bunch of stuff. And I think suffering can cause you to be more empathic toward other people and actually really kind of get where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think so. It has a way of maturing your heart. You've got to toughen up a little bit as well as fall on God. And you have to toughen up to say, I need God's help while I'm still in my broken state. And I think that's not easy. That's not easy for me to do. I don't know about you. I've got another observation here, that suffering is what sanctifies me. It is the crucible that purifies me as well as teaches me my dependence on the Father, as Chet said, knowing I need reconciliation while I am still in my broken state. And by broken state, I'm talking about a broken state of mind. The Bible talks about that weak heart and that internal spirit that has gone to liquid. There's no strength. There's no sense of healing, or there's no sense of even purity in that state of mind. It feels like everything's falling apart. But without being tested, a crucible is that which purifies metal, and you bring it to extreme heat, and you skim off the dross, and you have the pure element that you're searching for. Usually it falls to the bottom of the crucible. Well, that's not a bad mental image, and that's why the Bible uses it. It's heat, it's pressure, it's stress, and it changes people. And it changes some for the better, and others, they struggle more. Looking at John chapter 9, let's read a couple, 3 verses here. This is Jesus is the he here. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned, nor his parents, but it was in order that the works of God might be displayed in him. I came across this, and I thought about Jesus' answer a little bit. And I want to point out that Jesus doesn't say, it's so that I could perform a miracle in your presence and heal the man. But he says, in order that the works of God might be displayed in him. And if you think about it in context, the way that Jesus answers the question, well, let's back up just a little bit. First of all, he's ditching the gotcha question, isn't he? He totally disregards the fact they want to trap him in trying to, establish some sort of legal precedent. It had to have been the parents' sin. Was it this man's sin? He was born blind. Are we talking about sin in the womb now? I mean, it's really a silly question when you start to think about it. They're saying, was his sins? He was born blind. Are you accusing a child in utero of being a sinner now? So it was a ridiculous question. He ignores the question, rightly so. Jesus knows exactly when to ignore a stupid question. It's always good that we can see that he's allowed to do that, and we're allowed to do that too, by the way. Let's get back to the point. He doesn't say it's so that I will be glorified when I do a miracle. He says so that the works will be evident in this man. And that had me thinking a little bit. And we've got Samantha here, who I prompted her earlier. And I asked her what she thought about this. Well, I shared what I thought about this passage, and she told me what she thought about it. And I thought, since we've got someone here that can speak from firsthand experience, I was hopeful that Samantha would share some insights on this passage with us. What do you think, Samantha?
So I was thinking, actually, after I texted you, that question that the disciples asked probably was not the first time. I'm going to assume that the blind man probably heard them ask that. Probably not the first time he had ever heard something like that. So not only is he basically suffering in a sense because he can't see in a way, but also because people think something about him or his family that's not true.
I would agree.
And as far as like the works of God being revealed, I think later on when he's cast out of the synagogue, you see that Jesus comes and finds him, and he wants to worship Jesus, and the Pharisees don't. And that's kind of always been kind of an interesting insight to me, because that would have been a perfect excuse for him after being cast out to not want anything to do with God anymore.
Yeah.
So maybe his suffering, both before he was healed and after, gave him, I'm trying to think how to put what I'm thinking. Like he wanted something better, if that makes sense. And he knew that Jesus was the better way.
Okay. I hadn't thought about that either. The thought that this man was born blind and I don't want to diminish the miracle, but only for the fact that Jesus was going to perform a miracle in their midst, discounts what Jesus' answer is in regards to God's works being manifest or made known through this person, through this man. And so I was thinking about, how this affected childhood and moving to adulthood, how this affected this man's impact to have relationships with his family and with people in the community. How, as Samantha pointed out, he's probably heard this ridiculous debate before about whether the sins of himself or his parents causes blindness, and he's got this prejudice hanging over him. But even after the healing, there are still lessons of God's sovereignty in the man's life. There are still things that are being revealed in regards to his character as a result of his being healed of his blindness. And I thought, why can't our mental state also be like this of the blind man, in that there were things that were revealed about his relationship to God that were shaped by his blindness. There are things about our relationship with God and with others that are shaped about our mental unwellness. And suffering from a standpoint of whether it's this blindness from birth, whether this is the result of a hereditary trait that causes problem with interacting with the world in a healthy way in some cases, God can still use these circumstances to reveal his nature, to show his mercy, to show his ability to bring to salvation that which is not healed, not whole. He can still do that.
Also in verse 7, it shows that the blind man had a thing that he had to do. He had to go wash his eyes after Jesus put the mud on his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows that he has faith in Jesus being able to do what he said he would do.
Sure. He had a working faith. He was willing to follow the directions. And you know what? You'd almost say, well, what person wouldn't, right? This is your chance. Someone has told you that your sight will be restored when you wash this spit salve off of your face. And you're going to do it. But he showed a lot of his own confidence in that disability. And it wasn't just that moment, is my argument. I think there's more behind that comment than just that mere instance in his life. A couple observations regarding ourselves and others who may be suffering. We might say to a friend who has a flat tire, well, how is God growing you through that flat tire? You had to deal with that, and maybe you had to show a little ingenuity to figure out how to use the little donut spare or whatever. You're able to take care of that problem. And we know we would hesitate to ask such a person when they are in the waters up to their neck, as Psalms 69 makes reference. I'm up to my neck. I'm about to drown. I'm about to go under. And you probably wouldn't come up to someone who is in that mental state where they feel as though they are just gasping for air, just holding on to any semblance of sanity, and say, well, how can you grow through this? It's probably not a tactful way to do it. God does sanctify us through suffering, and there may be more elegant or personal ways to have a conversation with someone regarding those kind of feelings. We can kind of trigger, hard thoughts if we're not careful. Yes, Beth?
I think that suffering can help you get your priorities straight because it has a way of bringing into the light what's truly important.
when the heat is on, those little things just don't matter anymore, do they? Again, you want to try to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but normalcy goes out the window sometimes. And it does bring our focus on the things that are important. Yes, sir.
I wanted to make a comment and I have a question for you. Right now, one of the biggest places that they're suffering is North Korea, and they actually have generational, like a generational sin concept where a member of your family does
Hmm.
something against the regime, then they'll suffer for 2 generations after. And is there anything that you know right now that we have any plans of trying to rectify this problem that there is in the world right now? Or is America just, their hands are tied because of nuclear powers and things like that, or what?
Well, I'll only observe that North Korea is a very closed country, so they're not open to foreign travel or intervention in their policies, and they have a very dictatorial or very heavy-handed government. From what I've read and studied on the subject, I think that many of those individuals suffer under a mind control practically. They're such a heavy-handed government, and our nation is currently pulling back from global peace rather than engaging with it, I think. So I don't know what kind of opportunity that creates. That may be one that we have to leave a little further down the list while we'll deal with the things that are closer to home. Because I don't have an answer for how to get in and try to alleviate that kind of concept. I'm sure there are people that are, without my knowledge, because they have to do it covertly, they have to sneak, right, to get in. And since God is a merciful God, I have to hope that they're sneaking around and helping people with the gospel as best as they can. But they're not going to put that in the bulletin, and not if they got any sense, because it's going to mean their life could be a peril for what they're doing. And not that that's, stops you from doing a work like that, but you're going to be ineffective if you're run out of the country or sent home. So there may be more going on than we can know, because it has to be so secretive because of the situation. That's about the best way I know to answer that. Mental unwellness can feel like a perpetual state where our mood will never improve. Unless there's potential to heal from the illness, we may in exasperation say, I can't draw closer to God. I can't even get out of bed in the morning. And again, just as an observation that I think carries through here is we know drawing closer to God is the answer to this. But suffering clarifies and makes things priorities when, to Beth's words, or something close to that, when I can step back and look at that a little objectively. Sometimes we're in the middle of it and it doesn't make sense why we don't have the strength or energy to get out of bed. It can happen. Sanctification may arrive in the form of a permanent scar or pain that, in spite of my hurting, is a living example of how God does not reconcile us because of our perfection, but because of His grace. Our mental thorn in the flesh may never be removed to make us emotionally whole, yet does not tie God's hands from preserving my soul. And I want us to understand that too. It's that we may feel challenged by how to help someone who's dealing with a situation of mental unwellness. We may feel unprepared or uninformed, or we don't know how to guide a person in that state of mind. But realize that if their attitude is that they're giving to God even when they don't know how to deal with what's going on inside of them, that doesn't stop God from being able to preserve us, being able to restore us. That restoration may not come in this lifetime. It just might not. I want to spend some time over the next several class periods, I don't know how many yet, looking at some of these, I'll say, healthy and unhealthy states of mind. I hope it's not too distressing to go through and look at some of these symptoms of mental stress and mental unwellness. But for each of the unhealthy states of mind, there's a core approach to how to restore a more healthy way of thinking. We may never totally eliminate some of our predilections, some of our moods, some of our attitudes, some of the way that we're wired to think. We may never be able to deal with some of those, but we can move towards healthier ways of dealing with each of these situations. I'm bouncing all around tonight. I'm not sure how I got quite this bouncing around, but confession and mental wellness. So is there a correlation? Is there a pathway here? Does confession offer diagnosis or the root cause of certain behaviors that may not be readily apparent? There are techniques that are used in circles of those trying to help people understand themselves. And maybe you've heard of journaling before, which is to write down your feelings or write down your experiences and sort of keep a record of how you feel, how you're reacting to things. And from my understanding of journaling, it's the act of going through the process of actually putting it down on paper that has the benefit, rather than someone reading your journal and then, oh, well, I can figure out what's wrong with you because you wrote it all down for me. That's not the point of journaling. It's so that you take that time and effort and concentration to look at yourself and then express it. And isn't that what confession is? Look at yourself and express it. Confession to God is that conversation which bears yourself openly. Confession is a challenge for some people. We don't like to admit to our problems. We don't like to admit to our weaknesses. But it is a conversation. It's similar to journaling, but it's typically more of an oral fashion. You can write down your prayers too. There's nothing wrong with that. But it requires you to focus again, to think about your state of mind, and then tell God about it. We've already said God knows anyway, but that action or that process is the part that has its benefit in helping yourself understand yourself. When you're in a mood or state of mind of confession, you've got to be honest with yourself. You've got to absolutely take time to understand how you feel and be honest with your feelings and take the time to explore those thoughts, and then confession to one another as well as confessing to God. And you know, the hearer of a confession can be very important in that it is it's again a process which yields the benefit more so than any kind of information sharing that leads to a necessary fix or course of action that's going to take care of the problem. The confession is the openness and the honesty and the trust that is the healing aspect of the confession when it's us talking to ourselves, one another. It's not though a person can document and come up with a solution to fix a person. But that confidant that you can express your emotions and feelings to can give you feedback, can give you a response, but it's really my process as the confessor that is more important, that I engage in it with that open trust. And on the part of the listener, the one who I trust has to be able to keep it to themselves, first of all. But it's not so that they have to solve the problem. And that's another step. Samantha.
It's going to comment, you kind of caught my attention earlier when you were talking about, processing your feelings. And I've fairly, I think, been accused of being too psychoanalytical, I think too much about why I feel certain things. But I don't see anything wrong with that personally, because if you're feeling something and you figure out why you're feeling that way, then it's easy to potentially find a solution. I think a lot of people don't like to explore why they feel a certain way, and so they remain in that state of mind, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then I also wanted to comment on what you were saying about confessing to other people. I think that can be super challenging, just because, like you said, you have to be sure that you can trust the person, and you don't know how someone's going to react when you tell them something. It can be positive or negative, and I think that's the scary part about confessing to people.
Yeah, dealing with emotional state, dealing with our inner thoughts is risky. There's risk involved. And if there's nothing risked, there's less likelihood of moving forward. We have to expose ourselves to a certain level of risk in order to face some of the challenges that cause us stress. And some of us don't feel strong enough to rise to that occasion. We don't feel like we've got the tools necessary. We don't feel like we have the inner strength. We don't feel like we have the resolve. We don't feel like we want to face that inner demon that has been the result of trauma. And I understand that. It's difficult. It's a real challenge to find that person or persons that you can talk to on this level. But I'm going to argue that it's important that you do so. I don't know that our confession is limited to confessings of sins. I think they could be confessions of a state of mind. And I think that could be helpful in our relationships for people to understand where we're coming from. Why we're struggling to see things the way that they see things, for example, or why we seem to be locked into a certain state of mind when it looks like there's an obvious pathway forward. So I want to encourage us to think about establishing a healthy approach to talking about how we feel. For that therapy of being able to talk it out. There's probably psychological terms for bottling things up, but things can be bottled up till they explode sometimes. Those aren't healthy approaches to shunning thinking about how we feel or expressing that. And what's the point of family if you can't talk to them? What's the point of personal relationships if it's not to talk and to heal? All right, we'll pick up later.